All right, after some delays for technical issues, we're here. I'm Kelsey with a co-founder of the Facing Project, and I'm here today with Mr. the wonderful, the beautiful Justin Ahrens. Justin is the founder and principal of Rule29, who, in full disclosure, they've done my website for, geez, Justin, what, probably 6 years now, something like that?
I think, yeah, it's been about 5 years.
So all the branding, and they did the cover of my most recent book, Where Am I Eating, and all the branding for Where Am I Wearing, and things like that. So I've gotten to know Justin quite well over the years, and we've traveled to Africa together. And I'm really excited to have him on here today. He's also an author of a book called Life Kerning, which I gave my copy away, or I would show it to everyone.
There's only one left.
There's only the one left. So now it's worth a lot of money because
Right,
it's a rare find, and I had signed copies floating out there somewhere.
Nice.
He's also a speaker, just an awesome dude that lives a great story, and I think actively seeks out to live a great story and help other companies and other people tell their own story. So I'm really pumped today to talk to Mr. Justin Ahrens. Thanks for coming on, Justin.
Oh, thanks for having me, brother. It's always great to talk to you.
So I'm really excited to talk to you for a number of different reasons. I think our stories are kind of similar, how travel has impacted us, how meeting people who live much different lives than our own has helped us see ourselves different, our own stories, what's important to us. So I thought maybe you could share with us what traveling to Africa and meeting people who live vastly different lives than our own has done for you.
Yeah, so back in 2007, I took my first trip to Africa, and the reason we went is, you know, we're a strategic creative firm, and so we brand a lot of different types of organizations, and we were talking to our client about the power of story and how we're kind of made as humans to understand and take story in, and we as creatives, when we have the opportunity to use story at its, you know, sort of maximum impact, you can have some amazing results. And so I remember the CEO was like, well, how can you do that if you've never been to Africa and have seen the reality? And, you know, I thought that was a great point.
Yeah.
And it also made me pause for a second, because I don't get to see all of my clients' products and services and all that sort of thing. So I was like, wow, maybe I'm not paying attention as much as I should. So anyway, so we ended up going, and I was able to go with a good buddy of mine, Brian, who you also know, Kelsey, who's a photographer at Wonderkind Studios. And we went there, and it literally changed my world. I had been in poor places before, and but going into a developing part of the world where arguably the area you're in is, not that this is something to be proud of, is probably in the top 3 of the worst living conditions in the world. I just couldn't comprehend it. That normal compared to my normal was a problem. I literally think about Africa every day, and I love that tension now. But before I got to that point, I realized that all the things that I had maybe taken for granted, or I just sort of skimmed over. So for example, a lot of times as designers, we'll look at a statistic, and we'll turn that statistic into some sort of foundation for a story or a narrative, or maybe even just a graphic. And what I had been missing for 8+ years was that statistic wasn't just something interesting to create a design out of. It was actually a living, breathing person. And that was really something that made me realize I need to take a look at our process. I need to take a look at how I live my life and how I ran my company. And you know, even I think you may have had this experience too, because I can't remember when you first had your kids, but when I came back from Africa, I remember sitting there and like literally yelling at my 4-year-old son to finish his supper, because 3 days earlier I'd been in a camp where the kids ate once a day. They're lucky. So anyways, to say that it shifted me is an understatement. And I think since then I've been back every year but one.
Was there a moment of, because I think that some of us come across this, and I see people, like I'll go out and travel with students to different countries, and some of us we'll allow it to impact us, or we'll allow some things to impact us, and we'll change. We have these experiences that are just this full on, like, how do we process this? And then we have to make decisions. Like, do we just want to kind of close off and just like, okay, that's over here, and this is back to my normal life. And then other people like, well, I had this experience now. How am I going to apply this? How am I going to live different? Was there ever the tension of that moment where you thought about just like, hey, like, okay, Africa, it's like the TV commercials that I saw. I'm just going to compartmentalize it as a TV commercial, and I'm just going to move on back with my life in the Chicago area. Was there ever like a moment?
There's lots of moments. I think when I first went there, that's how I thought it would be. You know, I'd get there, maybe I see some things that were uncomfortable, and then I would somehow put it in a box, right, and kind of move on, and maybe go back to that box when I needed some ideas or focus, whatever else. But I think what's really interesting there is, and again, for me, it was the perfect place to go because it was so earth-shatteringly beyond what I imagined that it didn't allow me to build that wall. Like I was faced with, I mean, there were several times, I think I told you a story. I remember one time I was in Kibera. It was our second to last day. And in the area that we're in, there was at the time 1 million plus people with HIV. You know, we were working at a local community church that was feeding some street kids. And I'm just like, what in the world am I going to be able to do here? What kind of impact can I make? And it was so overwhelming, just the immensity of the scenario and how complex it was, that I just literally broke down. Mm-hmm. And so I'm over here in the corner crying, right?
Yeah.
And this guy comes over and grabs my arm and hands me an oar. And he goes, come with me. And I go over, and there's this big vat of rice, and we're stirring the rice, you know, and we're just kind of sitting there talking, and we're stirring, and I'm crying, right? I'm a mess. And he's like, telling me his story. He grew up right outside of this area. He was in the slums, and he went to the university in the United States, and he was back now.
Wow.
Serving. I was like, what? You know, my mentality was like, why are you back? Why would you come back? I mean, you kind of had seen the other side of things, which was a total ignorant and arrogant thing to say that I didn't realize at the time. And he looked at me like, you idiot. He was very gracious. He didn't say anything. And I helped him pour out these rice bowls. And he goes, come with me. And I went, and I had served with him these kids. And it was a Friday. And he goes, okay, guys, I'll see you on Monday. And he turns around and he goes, I'm here because for the next 2 days, these kids won't eat, but I'll be here Monday to feed them.
Wow.
And I was like, that's, amazing. Because I think we have in the Western culture, this sort of extreme home makeover concept, right? I put a bunch of money into it and help them with something, and everything would be great. And the reality is, a lot of the work that we do in Africa, the poor are still poor. I'm not bringing them, or I'm not doing anything, but I am not enabling the organizations we work with to make them less poor. I'm working with organizations that are helping train locals to try to take a little bit more control of their reality, to try to live an incrementally better life. And that's a really hard thing for us Westerners to grasp. So I try to build walls. I try to deal with that. And it's just really not possible, for me at least.
So up until the time you went to Africa for the first time, because I know that you guys do a lot of through like Wheels for Water, which is, we can talk about that a little bit, where you're biking to raise funds and awareness for the Democratic Republic of Congo. You're doing all these things now since I've met you, to give back and to raise awareness. And was that happening before? Were you doing that stuff before you went to Africa?
Yeah, I was, but it wasn't really. Gosh, I don't know how to say it. I guess if I really think about it now, and I'm to be transparent, I think it was more self-serving than it was for serving. And I think we all got to get into a habit of that. And there's an element of that we just have to be honest, right? A lot of us do that kind of work because it makes us feel good. And there's a large part of that's okay. But if that's why you're doing it, then maybe we should look at that, I think, a little bit more. As a creative firm, one of the things that we get to do is we get to come along different organizations and help them with services that they may not be able to afford at that time, or, help them, have a bigger reach or tell their story better. And that's a very valuable thing. I think often we kind of look at that and say, hey, I did this for you, So, because I'm doing this for you, I can kind of do whatever I want, or, it just seems like it's not the right perspective. And I think there are times that we all fall into that. I was falling into that. And so we did a lot of stuff locally, and, we still do stuff locally, and, our perspective shifted, of course, but I think that it was, but maybe not at a level that was really authentic. And I think what's great is part of what we try to do here at Rule 29 is we try to create space for those things that people that are interested in. We try to impact that somehow. That could be as simple as me letting them go early, or working a half day now and then so they can go serve somewhere, right? Or maybe we help adopt a program and do some strategy for them, or help tell their story, or do a video or something. Or we try to get them as a client. So we try to incorporate that into our day-to-day, because I think it's also really powerful. Since we spend all of our day at work, wouldn't it be great to work for an organization that makes the world a better place in whatever capacity that you're passionate about? And so that's what we tried to go towards more these days.
Do you feel like there's a struggle at all you talked about going in the slums of Africa, this super complex issue.
By the way, as a side note, I'm not supposed to be drinking Diet Coke, and this is on film now.
Oh no! Are we gonna have to stop and delete it?
You can totally bust me now.
Who says you're not supposed to be drinking Diet Coke?
I made a deal with my kids. I would reduce my Diet Coke intake.
Well, let's be honest. Your kids don't think you're very cool, and they won't watch this video.
That's totally true. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
No. So, you have these really complex issues like global poverty, or slavery, and the things that you've come, people that don't even have access to clean water or any education. Like they're more complex than a TV commercial. They're more complex than buy one, give one. But you're also in the business of coming up with like a something that's simple that people, the simple story sometimes is the most impactful story. But we need to tell a simple story about a complex issue. Can that be a struggle, and how do we bridge that? Is that a shitty question?
Yeah, kind of, because you kind of lost me. You had me in the beginning when I thought we were about to make fun of Tom's, and then we went to somewhere else. So
yeah,
is your question? Tell me your question again.
So I don't know if I know my question. So my question, I think, is that you have this complex issue. So you face these complex issues, right? You raise awareness about life in the slums, but you also need to reach people with that complex issue, and you need to kind of simplify it in some fashion. Now we can go to the Tom's direction as well. But there I feel like they do not do a good job of it. Buy one, give one. It's simple. That's why Tom's works, because it's a really simple idea where people think, hey, look, if I buy a pair of these way overpriced $65 pair of shoes, some poor person on the other side of the world gets a pair too. Like, that's really simple for me to understand. I can feel good about myself. And that's way oversimplification of a really complex issue that's not really being tackled in the right way when it comes to Tom's. But so I feel like that they've oversimplified it. But as a marketer, as you're trying to reach people with these ideas, as a storyteller too, in a Facebook post or a tweet, like, you need to simplify that complex story. I don't know if you have any tips on how to do that, or how you've balanced that in the past.
Okay, that's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I had to ask it like 8 times for me to have an idea of what I was asking.
So let me drill down to a couple of those items. So the Warby Parker, buy a pair of glasses, give sunglasses, that whole concept, buy one, give one. There's an element of that I think is really brilliant, right? It's the fact that, and this is really what I think the magic sauce is. We don't look at it that way, unfortunately, as Westerners, but I can do something very simply to make impact somewhere else, right? Now, yes, maybe it's self-serving because I'm getting a pair of shoes, but theoretically I need shoes, right? So I mean, I think that's the great thing. And then, if for those who really get into it, then they're educated on a particular area that maybe those shoes are going to. So those aspects of it, I think, are really great. The simplification of it, I think, is great. Let me put this in a different light. So there's an organization I work for that their primary methodology and process is they would work with locals and help train local leaders to transform a community. So it's kind of community development, but not development in like physical infrastructure. It was more development in healthcare and education and farming best practices, right? But that was a really hard, really unsexy story to tell. Shift to LifeWater that we work with, and it's really easy for me to say, hey, Kelsey, do you know if you give $40 to LifeWater, that will give one person water for life? Totally get it. I know what $40 means. I can relate that to something. But they're both doing great things. And so unfortunately for the Western donor, we're so used to that kind of Kickstarter, I'm going to donate and I'm going to get something out of it. Or it's a very simplified message. So I know that my money's going to something. I think that's just our reality. And so a lot of the consulting that we do now when we're talking to organizations is like, hey, if you're not going to give them something, which I support, if you're going to give, I still think you want to give because you're moved by the story. You give because we have a lot. And when we have a lot, we should, in my opinion, share it somehow. But let's give a message so they know, hey, your $25 gives a child a book for the year, or whatever, or feeds them for a week. That stuff I think is really valuable, because then you're making them at least remember something. And I think the education part is great. I think the days of giving money and not giving a rip or just doing it because for a tax break, I'm sure there are people that will do that. But I think those days are long gone, because I think consumers now, in fact, I almost look at donors as a different level of consumer now. It's like those people who want to make impact, these generations now and earlier ones really feel like they can and will because of the internet and social media and all that sort of thing. They want to know, where their money's going. Like, Charity Water drives me crazy at some level, even though I love, how they've kind of moved our methodology. But the fact that you can give money and kind of see real well is, although it's gimmicky, it's kind of awesome, because you can, there's no way you would look at Google Maps and see where, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia is. You would just not care, So I think there's good in all these things, and I'm never going to pick on them to the point where I don't wish they were around. I think what I want to challenge organizations like Tom's, for example, is how are you continuing to educate and evolve your process so you're actually making a more of a sustainable impact versus just a light touch impact? Yeah, that's my philosophy. I don't know if I answered your question now.
Yeah, no, I think so, for sure.
But I think that's, we just want simple messaging. Since we live in a 140 character world now, it's like, give me something simple that I can remember so I can retweet it and be a part of it.
And with the water issue, I know that like getting clean wells is really important, but almost just as important is washing your hands. And that can be a much tougher, if you started up a hand washing NGO, that could be a lot tougher to raise funds for than if you're like actually putting in wells.
Yeah. Well, one of the debates we have is actually water is the easiest part. It's sanitation is the number one issue, and then hygiene education. But who wants to hear about proper sanitation practices, right? Yeah. No one. It's easier to talk about, hey, you helped me build a well, and that $6,000 that you're giving me to build a well, that's also going to proper sanitation, hygiene education. That's not nearly as sexy.
Yeah.
But it's really important to know that.
Yeah. And also like building a new well is sexier than like maintaining the old one too.
Right.
It's just like the realities I'm sure that folks have to face.
Oh yeah.
In that line of work.
No, that's a good point.
In a sense, like we're attracting people with the stories, like simplifying them, but helping them on the journey to maybe greater awareness, like more education. I think one of the things that people come frustrated with Tom's, and not to just keep talking about Tom's, but if you like dig down deep into their website, like it becomes very superficial very fast, and there's not a lot that you can dive deeper and learn. So as a storyteller, were you a storyteller? And I hate to use just like labels, because I actually had a person one time say, why do you consider yourself a storyteller, not an author? I'm like, well, this is ridiculous. But did you actually think about stories as much before you went to Africa as you did after?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think I think we looked at it a little differently. You know, we looked at it more of, I feel as my career has evolved, and especially the last several years, just with social media and the internet just becoming more accessible, I think writing has become that much more critical. Where before that, we used to call ourselves visual storytellers.
Yeah.
You know? And we are, for sure, in my line of work, Kelsey.
Yeah.
But we actually all are at some level, right? You think about your Facebook post, Instagram, all that sort of Vine, whatever social media you're into. You're telling a story visually that way. But I did, for sure. But I don't think I looked at it as comprehensive as I do now, right? I would sometimes look at the middle of the story and then maybe the hopeful end. And I wouldn't maybe take enough time to understand the beginning, the intro, right? And then kind of go through all of the hooks in the story and figure out which part of those we should incorporate. And so, and I think that just, for me, I think that's just a natural, you know, kind of maturation process of, as you're kind of learning about that. But no, I do. But I think now,
did you ever see yourself like creating, like, I mean, you're a documentarian now, you know, I mean, you've had, I don't know how many people have seen your films, but I know you raised hundreds of thousands of dollars with the documentaries that you've done. I mean, is that something that you foresaw? Like, you ever, like 10, 15 years ago, you thought someday I'm going to make a documentary?
No, and that's actually a great point. I think I had a dream, you know, I mean, I actually wanted to be an actor. I can't believe I'm giving you this fodder. I wanted to be in film at some level, and I just felt so distant for me. You know, I was which is ridiculous because I don't think this way, but for some reason there's certain things in my life that I'm like, oh, that's impossible. You know, I grew up a Midwest kid like you, and for me, like, acting seemed so far out of the picture. And now as an adult, you know, one of the things that we say here all the time is anything's possible. And I think with technology, it's really become, all these things are within our grasp. So no, would I have thought we would have done a couple documentaries? No, I wouldn't have never thought I've written a book, or, you know, done a commercial, or, you know, we did a music video for one of our good friends who's a music, I can't say that word, who plays music.
Music, that's a tough one. Is that Sleeping at Last?
That's what it was, musician. Yeah, Sleeping at Last. Ryan O'Neill is so wonderful and gracious and amazing, and he trusted us with doing a video for one of his songs. And these are all things I would have, if you had written down, I'm like, that would have been a great life. That would be amazing. That's obviously not going to be me. Not to mention the fact that if you would have told me about the internet when I was a kid, I would have been like, you're on crack. Yeah. It sounds incredible.
Because, I mean, it really started. So I know that one of the things I recommend that people watch, and I struggled through it again and struggled through it, I mean, like, emotionally, like your TED Talk, you know, that in TEDx Naperville event, I watched that again today. And I mean, your heart is definitely out there. You know, and just this, you talk about how you started off just like drawing, like it was a love for drawing that now has led to all of this other stuff, from you know, movies to videos to books. Like, it seems like not like a logical path to all those things, just from a love for drawing.
Yeah, you know, I think what's cool about storytelling and drawing, or just being creative, I mean, you get this being a fellow creative, is that when you get into creating a story, let me start over. I read a great book by Donald Miller. It's A Million Miles in 1,000 Years. I think that's what it is. And the premise of his book, if I was to sum it up, is, are you living a life worth reading? And man, that really resonated with me. Not that we need to go and do necessarily incredible, amazing things, but, you know, when we look at for example, we look at a design problem challenge, we think about what are all the assets that we have to work with, or that are working against us, or that sort of thing. And just like this conversation we're having right now, you know, thank you, by the way, for having me on this, but, you know, I know you, and that's a cool thing. And we get to do what we're doing right now together. That's amazing. And then, you know, we met Sleeping at Last, and he needed a music video. Why not us? Why couldn't we do it?
Yeah.
You know, worst case scenario, it turns out horrible and we never put it on YouTube. So I just think that's one of those things where I'm trying to encourage my kids to realize that anything is possible. And it sounds so cliche, but I really believe it to be the case. if one of my children is really passionate about some area of the world, well, we can do something about it, and I think that's the one thing, to make impact, you have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
I think too often we feel like we have to try to solve that problem, and that's an American thing. But why not find an organization and help them tell their story, right? And support them. And so, that's I just think that's all part of the perspective.
Do you feel like you're a kid that's reaching your kids and that they're acting on that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they talk about stuff that we do. We a friend of mine started a project called the Leap Year Project. In fact, I don't know if you have like a links that go along with this, but we should link to the Leap Year Project. The next leap year, I think, is next year, I think, right? Or soon.
I don't know. I'm not good
anyways,
at math.
His whole concept was he was going to go to, his name is Victor Saad. He was going to go to basically get his master's degree. And he realized he got accepted and all that sort of thing. He realized that was going to be an amazing amount of debt he was going to get into. And he'd kind of worked professionally for a while. And so it was, the leap year was coming up, and he just thought, man, I should take a leap and do something kind of crazy. Younger guy, late 20s. And so he decided that he was going to try to get an internship every month. So 12 total for the year of the leap year at organizations that he felt were incredible. Right? And he did it. And along the way, he encouraged others to do something. What is basically the premise is, what is one thing you can do to make your world better? Mm-hmm. For him, it was meeting other organizations and trying to help them with their social marketing or social cause related efforts. Other people would say, I think some other leapers did, I'm going to write a note to my wife every week for a year, or every month for a year. For me, what I did with my kids is we had a deal where all 6 of us had to pick something that we had to do as a family. That was the only rule. We had to do something to help our community as a family. And it was hard because at the time my youngest was like 4 or 5. Yeah. And then, I was 40. And so to find activities that all of us could do, we want to do 1 a month. We ended up doing 6. So 1 every 2 months. Yeah. And it was awesome. And they looked forward to it. And they talk about it still all the time. So we did everything from, we went to feed my starving children to, picking up a park as a family, to when we were on spring break. And if we ever went on vacation, you had to do it on vacation. So when we went on spring break, we drove to New Orleans and worked in the 9th Ward in this lady's house. And it was awesome because my kids got out of the car and it was their first time in a black neighborhood. Wow. Unfortunately, it was their first time. And it was great because they got to hang out with all the people that they were around in the neighborhood and talk. And they realized, like, man, there was no difference between me and someone that looks different than me. And so it was awesome. So yeah, I think it's made impact. And they do stuff on their own now. Like, they get really passionate about trying to make impact. But they're still kids. So they still would rather, play basketball or, beat on each other.
Because like Harper's 6, and I've tried to have conversations with her about this stuff, and quickly devolves into like My Little Pony conversation or something about toots. Usually about farts. Yeah, that's usually what it's
first
about.
Of all, farts are the funniest thing in the world.
They are.
Let's not ignore that. Here's my encouragement to you: don't stop, because every time. Here's what's interesting: they talk about stuff, serving and doing things as a family and individuals, more with their friends. So they'll say something like, hey, I did this thing in New Orleans, it was pretty crazy. We did this, and this, met some awesome people. Or, my mom and dad are riding their bikes for the school in the Congo. And they have like a little box. I'm like, hey, would you donate? So just keep doing it, because you just don't know what they're retaining all the time. Mm-hmm. And all I know for sure is if you don't talk about it, they won't hear anything. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So do they think you're cooler now that you got like retweeted by Ed Sheeran, or tweeted at by Ed Sheeran?
Yeah, it's funny, my daughter is 15, and I texted her, I said, hey, just so you know, the video we did for Sleeping at Last just got tweeted by Ed Sheeran. And she goes, what? Why are you not more excited? And I was like, well, you can retweet it. And she's like, oh, I don't know about that, Dad. Yeah, I know, right? I'm thinking this is a gimme.
What do you have to do?
I don't know. I did tell her, though, if I ever meet any of her pop star friends, I'm going to take a picture of just me and them and just flood her Facebook or Instagram.
So one thing is we talk about the importance of like owning your own story, and how when we share our own story, it can benefit other people and help them like come to terms with what their story is, or learn from their own story, or learn how our stories connect. Like building stories connect people, or stories connect people, and they build community.
Yep.
And during your TED Talk, and I don't know if you'd shared that story before about Mr. H, who's your teacher, told you to draw, and about fifth grade, and that was a really tough time in your life. And you tell a story that's really kind of tough for you to tell. Had you told that story before in that kind of setting?
No, that was, in fact, I almost cut that out of the talk because, with TED, we're kind of really strict on timelines and that sort of thing. And then what was crazy is right before my talk, we had a bunch of technical difficulty. And so my slides didn't turn, as a designer, I'm going crazy. My slides don't look as good as they want. And so I was kind of off a little bit.
Yeah.
And it actually made telling that story a little easier. I had wrote about it. The first time I actually told really anyone about it is I wrote about it in Life Kerning.
Okay.
And it was interesting. I'd shared that story with one of my good buddies, Tony Narducci, who you also know.
Yeah.
And he helped me find him, and I went and thanked him in person like 2 years ago.
Wow. So that was Tony that kind of encouraged you to go and thank Mr. H.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was some fear of telling that story. Was there fear of writing that story and sharing it on a stage? Was there any of that?
Well, I don't know about you, but here's the interesting thing about writing that I just didn't expect. For me, I love the process. I enjoy it. But when I was writing the book, unlike a blog post, when I was writing the book, I didn't think about anyone reading it.
Yeah.
So I just wrote it really authentically. I didn't. And then I remember when I signed off on final manuscript, I was horrified because I was like, holy smokes. I said some personal stuff in there, right? Yeah. And which is me. I mean, I feel like I'm a pretty open person. I think that's the only way to get to be authentic, right? So yeah, I was a little scared about that. Excuse me. I wasn't. Yeah, it's personal, It was like being really raw. I mean, here's a super tough time when I was a kid, and but I felt what I was trying to say was, and try to hopefully inspire at least one person, was that if you don't think you can make impact in the world, then you're crazy. Because here's a teacher who saw me as, a difficult visual kid and gave me an opportunity to learn visually when he didn't have to. He could just check off the box that this kid's a, pain in the butt, make him take fifth grade over or whatever. But he didn't. And he took time, right, to help me. And he was hard on me and supported me and really shifted my whole life. And that was incredible. He didn't have to do that. And if he hadn't done that, I'm terrified to think about what would have happened to me, because I just didn't have I had zero support system. So I think that being vulnerable is worth the fact that, I've had since that talk, I've given that talk a couple of times. And man, every time I'll have someone come up to me that is a teacher who's, sobbing, and, you never quite know what to do with that, because you're really touched, they're touched, but you're just like, okay, I'm not sure how to process this. Yeah. Or I'll have people come up to me and say, man, I had a similar thing, and I haven't talked to my teacher, and I'm like, we'll find them on Facebook or whatever, and like, let them know now. So no, I think that part of it was worth it.
Do you feel like having written it down first, helped you be able to, because I think it can be difficult to tell our own stories. You feel like the writing process actually helped you tell it, where if you would have just been sitting down together over a beer, like it would have been harder to tell it, or less impactful?
I think writing it is incredibly important. Like, I wish I was more of a journaler, because I know the few times I've journaled, I've gone back and looked at what I've written, and I think that, wow, I didn't know that was that important to me, or I was that emotional, or sometimes I look at it and be like, wow, that's actually not bad writing. And it's crazy how much we probably miss of how creative we are, or how much something affects us when we don't do that. So I feel like the writing process has made me a better creative overall. And it's really helped me pause when I'm thinking about things, because often I think we get into this sort of caffeine driven, adrenaline, I'm going to answer you right now. And a lot of times when I write something out, and we've probably all experienced at some point when we're writing an emotional email of write the email first, save it, come back to it.
Yeah.
And how much that will shift. So yeah, I think the writing process was, cathartic and made me actually be more transparent appropriately. So yeah.
That's kind of amazing because if you take it back to like the Mr. H story, the whole, you had to write that book report, and you obviously did not want to write or whatever, and he let you draw it. So here now, 30 years later, now like the writing has helped also inform your art and your work and your life as a creative. It's a whole full circle.
Yeah, no, and I think, that's a great point. And I think writing is such an integral part of what we do. And I think, no matter what your profession is, like here, I have a friend who I think since high school or college journals a little bit every day on his phone.
Wow.
And it's funny, he'll save certain things. So he'll say, I'll be like, no, when we were together that time, we were like at, Chipotle. He's like, no, we weren't. We were at Noodles Company. I'm like, no, dude, it was Chipotle. I remember like yesterday. And he'll go back to his phone. He'll find it. And he was like, no, you said this. And I thought that was, hilarious, but it was at, Noodles and Company or whatever. And so for him, it was one of these things where he takes the time because he has a very busy kind of high powered job, and he likes highlighting tidbits of how he feels or things that he thinks are funny or whatever. And I really admire that because I've read some of his pages and it's just great. So I think everyone has the ability to be an author at some level, whether it's just for personal use or because we all have stories. And I think often the people that say they have boring lives, I found a lot of them are a lot more exciting than we'd imagine, but they just don't think what they're doing is a big deal.
Yeah. I feel like I'm a daily journal away from being David Sedaris.
Yeah, I think that
we all are.
I think that's pretty accurate.
It's like, if only I'd skip a journal every single day, I could just live my normal life and just have these golden nuggets,
But I tell you what, I could listen to him read anything.
Yeah.
He's hilarious.
Yeah, he is. So how do you help other people tell their stories or help brands tell their stories? I remember when we were first talking about the design for wearamIwearing.com after Where Am I Wearing had come out. Like, you sent this list of questions, and I think about this all the time, and I want to confess here, it's a little bit of embarrassed. I'm a little embarrassed about it, but I know one of the questions is like, what is your favorite color? And I feel like I gave the cheesiest answer ever. I was like, tell me if you remember it. Do you have any idea? I hope you never read it and don't remember it.
No, I do read it, but I do remember actually, and this is since we were both being honest, I was like, oh, this isn't really written that well.
Oh, no.
No, I'm teasing it a bit. I thought it would be, like, I was really excited about getting your audit back because I thought, because I think you're one of the funniest guys I know. And so I told my team, I'm like, he's either going to be a total smartass the whole time, and have some really, and you had some great quips in there. Yeah. But some of them were just kind of just like answered. And I was like, I thought he would do something more with this. Yeah.
So I don't know if I should. I remember the one, though, I felt like, part of me doesn't want to overwrite things because I think sometimes people expect it, like to overwrite it and put more meaning into something than it is. I remember one question was like, what is your favorite color? And I put something about the deep blue in the ocean being the same color as my daughter's eyes or whatever. And I'm just like, I just think, for some stupid reason, I think back about that answer all the time. So please,
was that an honest answer?
Yeah, that's my favorite color, is like this deep blue of the ocean, right? But I feel like I just overwrote it a little bit. And I think about that, I mean, once a month. For some reason, that stupid answer. I seriously think about it all the time. I have no idea. So could you send me the file? I'm going to change my answer.
Yes, I will send you the file.
But my whole point, getting back to these personal confessions, was like, obviously to help, bring my story, to help me tell my story as a company, you guys wanted to get to know me a little bit more. I mean, how do you help people tell their own story? Is that just part of the process, or what else does that look like?
Yeah, so for us, we look at it, and I know you kind of went through some of the process. You didn't go through all of it because we already had some of the facts that we needed, but first we really want to make sure that we understand it at all the different levels that we can. So the reason we send the audit, in fact, the reason why we ask you the color question is oftentimes we will find that clients will have a very specific thing in their mind, but they don't want to tell us what it is because they feel like it's going to hurt the creative process. And really, we would rather know what all the parameters are because we can actually be more creative within those. It's the worst answer anyone can give us is like, well, it's not quite what I had in mind. And so either two things would happen. Either you're not trusting the fact that what we showing you is good, or you weren't really authentic in our process and you didn't kind of give us all the feedback. And so for us, in order to build any story, right, you kind of have to get all the background. That's kind of how we look at it. And any history. And then also, hear from them where they hope the story goes. Like, what does success look like? What is that? And so we'll have people, for example, one of the questions we'll ask sometimes is, if your company was a ride at an amusement park, what ride would it be? What would it do? How would people be greeted? And you kind of take them through and kind of get them out of their normal and have them really tell what their perception of their company is and their story is and how they want people to experience that. And so we use that kind of storytelling to really help inform that. And then we kind of get into visual parts. Like, if you could look like anything or anyone or any product or service, what would it be? Give us details, show us those things. And so, we just try to get sort of that whole universe so we can start helping piece the stuff together in a more succinct way.
With the Facing Project, we have writers who get matched up with people facing a certain topic. And the writer has to meet with that person and get that person to share their story well enough where the writer can write as if they were them in the first person. And as I read the stories and as I read a lot of first drafts that come in from different writers, like sometimes you see like they didn't get deep enough into who this person is or what this person's story is. And so we're always looking for like tidbits of tips and to give them. So I think that the visual idea is a good one, like visualizing like what, I don't know, you can ask a person if you were an amusement park ride. To kind
of build off that, I think, if you look at some of our questions and you were to pull them apart, part of the reason why some of them are in there and kind of spaced out differently is because, and this is the same thing, like when we're sketching out ideas, we try to do like at least 50 sketches because the first 10 or 15 or 20 are the things that anyone would come up with.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm starting a bar called, I don't know, the Corkscrew Bar or whatever. That's a terrible name. Yeah. And so, everyone has automatically what that logo should be, right? And so we do a bunch of sketches and then we kind of set those aside. Then we start getting out into other ideas. And so I think it's a lot of the same time when you're interviewing someone is you bring in your personal assumptions in a story, which you probably experienced with some of those first drafts. And people are making assumptions and going someplace based on their history, which really is irrelevant. Because if you're trying to tell someone else's story, you have to dig as deep as you can to get their perspective. And so often our questions will be asking the same thing, but in different points of view, right? So if your company was a color, what would it be and why is almost the same answer or same question in some ways as, if your company was an amusement ride, what would it be?
Yeah.
And it's to try to get them to look at things from a different perspective, to get those sort of meaty, grainy things that we need as writers to bring out a really authentic, original, interesting story. So, I mean, that's one thing to think about is, take a classic question and what are some other ways you can rewrite it from different perspectives to, try to dig them a little deeper.
There's a tool that we recently found. This, StoryCorps.
I don't.
So there's a StoryCorps is they have people sit down together and someone asks someone questions and they record that. So very much like an oral history.
That's
And
cool.
they just came up with an app. So that these air on NPR a lot. And it's like they've got hundreds of thousands, if not like millions of stories that people have shared, and some of them have been shared on different NPR programs. And so it'll be like maybe it's like a father and son like sitting down talking about like a time in their life. I heard one story about a woman who had been trafficked when she was younger, that for the first time was talking about with her kid, and it was like it was being recorded, and it's just really kind of powerful things. But they have an app now that you can talk about, like, what topics are you talking about, who are you talking to, here's some recommended questions. You can go through and you kind of select what questions you feel like would be good. Now, a lot of times what we tell our story to our writers to go into the conversation is, because we want it to be more of a conversation than like an interview, is don't go in with a lot of questions. And I don't know if that's good advice or not, but that's what I don't know if I just never prepare for anything. Like I really don't ever have like
I know that. Yeah.
a lot of questions going into something. I'm just kind of like just sitting down and have a conversation with someone. Let's take our time. Let's get to know each other. But anyhow, the StoryCorps app, I think you'd be a fan of that. You should check it out.
Well, I think one if I could give you one piece of advice, I think it depends on the person. So you really have to figure that out with you guys. See, Kelsey, you're very disarming. You're very personable, and you have a natural gift of getting people to talk and tell your story, and you hear things, and then you ask questions further. Being a good listener and being a good writer are two totally different things. And so I think that it's really important to create, maybe different ways of approaching it based on the writer. For example, we have a couple of writers on staff, and one writer can look at something and write this beautiful, creative information that's super technical, but is like incredibly enjoyable to read. It's almost poetic.
It's like better than my question and answer of your question.
No, it can't be. No, when you're talking about your daughter's eyes being like the ocean, that's big time. But then you have someone else who's a very efficient, very correct writer, and it's just a little bit more straightforward and dry. Neither of them are better than the other. It just depends on the preference, right? Yeah. And so when I want the other one to write a little bit more creatively, we just have to take a different approach of giving him the right questions to ask and kind of showing him the style we want, which is a little different what I'm talking about. But my point is, if someone isn't like you, how are you going to help them, move on? Because I agree. I think we're similar in the sense that I'm not nearly as handsome as you are, but I like having conversations with people and kind of seeing where that goes. To me, that's the fascinating part of interviewing and telling a story, where others won't pick up on those cues and will need some guidance.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of things like to help folks with storytelling, so I know that you've done a lot of research, read through your blog posts, read, Life Kerning. You mentioned Donald Miller already. Are there any other resources, books, movies, documentaries on storytelling that have influenced you that you think that we should check out?
Besides my book?
Besides Life Kerning, for sure. I mean, that did it for me.
Yeah. Wow, that's putting me on the spot here. I'm embarrassed to say I have not been reading a lot lately because I've been really watching a ton of documentaries. But by the way, that's an interesting thing to look at. Is one of the things I've looked at to try to be a better storyteller, both writing and visually, is I've gotten into documentaries that are just kind of really, really brilliant. So I can give you a couple of films that I think would be really powerful.
Yeah. So what are some good ones?
So one of my favorites is called Hero Dreams of Sushi. And it's about the person who's considered to be the greatest sushi chef. I can't speak today.
Musician, sushi chef.
Yeah, in the world. And it's about so much more than sushi. It's really kind of, I don't know, it's just one of those movies that just completely, I think, is one of those things that if you're interested in storytelling and just want to see something that's really done beautifully, I think that's a great one. An oldie but goodie, and one that we talk about a lot here that we have people watch is I don't know if you ever saw the Will Ferrell movie Stranger Than Fiction.
Oh, okay. Yep. I saw it.
That is a great story-driven movie, and there's so many just really great parts in there about living a story. So if any of your viewers haven't seen that and are writers, that is a good one.
Actually, I was looking at your you wrote a blog post. I actually did do some preparation for
Cool.
this, even though I know you. How about that, huh? On storytelling, and you actually have a quote from Stranger in Fiction that said something like, it said exactly this, I think. Notice something you aren't looking for. No, I'm a horrible researcher. Maybe that wasn't the quote. There was some other quote from
No, there was
I'm just trying to show you that I did a lot of research for this interview.
yeah, it
and
was
I'm
something
supposed to be impressed.
it's something along the lines of it's important to know the character you are, so you know the character you're not. Something like
I have
that.
it. Often you have to know the stories that you aren't in
to know the story you are in. Yeah.
I thought that was really good.
Yeah.
How important, I mean, to me that speaks like to the power of empathy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what's really powerful about that, and the reason why I love that one so much, is often we kind of aren't overly honest with ourselves on the type of life or the things that motivate us. And so we keep complaining about those things that are in front of us, but we're really kind of looking through the wrong colored glasses.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I love about that. And that's actually a great, I think, lesson when it comes to writing is, you gotta, unless you're writing, a creative fiction story, you need to kind of put that stuff aside. I think another great film, I don't know if you've seen The Art of Banksy, Exit Through the Gift Shop.
Yep, I saw that.
That is another great film about, creating a story around a personality. I think it's pretty fantastic.
I think one of the things about those documentaries that's really amazing too is that, I mean, they're filming, especially like that story, like Exit Through the Gift Shop, is that they're filming and they really don't have any idea what is going to happen. And I can totally relate to that. Like I had a contract, I was contractually obligated to write Where Am I Eating before I had lived any of the book. And I'm like, what is the story going to be? I have no idea like what's going to happen anywhere. And I feel like that's just kind of like jumping off the cliff and hope something, happens on the way down that's somewhat interesting. But then, I mean, life happens and you have to make a narrative. What is the narrative? What is the story? And that can be the tough part, whether it's a facing project writer sitting down with someone who's talking about being homeless or living in poverty or being sex trafficked. Like, what is the essence of that story? Like, what is the thread? And
I think it's a great point. I think another great influence and something that I've been focusing a lot on is, This American Life and some of their related podcasts are so stinking brilliant. When I'm more entertained by some of their podcasts than I am watching a movie. So those are kind of the things that I look at. So This American Life for sure. And then they also have one of their key contributors started his own company called Gimlet Media, and he started a podcast called Startup about starting up a podcast company. Yeah, and they just did their second season where they're focused on other and whether you're into business or not, it's a fascinating story about basically telling your story and why people should invest in you and all that sort of thing. But anyways, these are all kind of things we look at when and influence our storytelling and different approaches, because a lot of times the podcasts, they have no idea where it's going. And, like the whole concept, I think why Serial was so intriguing is that we didn't know how it was going to end. And I think that part of it, I don't think anyone for a second thought they would end with kind of, gray. And so anyways, I think that's a really powerful part.
That's real though, and that's like, how do you make a story and end it with gray? But that's life.
Yeah. Yep.
Cool. Anything else you want to talk about?
No, I just want to thank you for having me, and next time, you want to do one of these again, I'm in.
I'm happy to do one as well. Because I think that you guys are maybe doing something, I don't know, but I would happy to talk with you guys.
We have something going on that you're going to be a part of. You just don't know about it yet.
Oh gosh, should I be afraid?
No, I'm not going to tape a microphone to your chest hair again and rip it off.
That has happened. That is on YouTube. That was horrible.
Hey man, thanks a lot.
So you can check you guys out at rule29.com. Is it wheelsforwater.com?
It's wheelsforwater.org. Yep, check that out.
Yep. Awesome. Well, hey, thanks, Justin. I'm going to hang up here and then we can have a private conversation.
All right, thanks.
All right.